I don't want to work for the man anymore. I'd like to be my own owner. I think I got a little bit of a niche. And hey, I'd like to become a multimillionaire. And so if that's the case, why not instead just buy the business so that when you close the deal, you are profitable on day one, you walk away with cash. And I think it's the same for a newsletter. We've bought 2 newsletters thus far, and I'm going to keep acquiring them because it's so much easier to grow through M&A than organically.
Bright Ideas episode number 359.
Hey, I know what'll cheer you up.
Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast, where we let proven experts help you to find the next bright idea to implement in your business today. And now, here's your host, Trent Dyrsmid.
This is unbelievable.
Its true force has never been fully understood.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bright Ideas Podcast. As always, I am your host, Trent Dyrsmid, and my job here as the host is to find the most interesting, smart, and successful entrepreneurs that I can and get them to come on the show and share the story of their success in such a way as to allow you to extract as many actionable golden nuggets that you can implement in your business starting today. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this episode with my guest, Cody Sanchez, who we will introduce in just a moment or two. But first, 2 quick announcements. Number 1, if you are looking to grow or start an Amazon reseller business, we have a Facebook for that, and you can get to it at brightideas.co/Facebook. Number 2, if you do not yet follow me on the Twitter sphere, I highly recommend that you do, as I've been leveraging Twitter as of late to share content in the form of threads. Think of it as mini blog posts as opposed to just individual tweets. And this content is stuff that I'm not sharing anywhere else. So if you want to be able to tap into that, make sure you do follow me on Twitter. At Trent Dyrsmid is my handle. And finally, if you're a repeat listener, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in yet again. If you haven't already done so, would love it if you would take a moment to like, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast listening app. And the reason that that is so incredibly important is that that teaches the algorithms that the show is full of goodness, and the algorithms will then go out and help promote the show to other prospective listeners. And now a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Flowster. If you run an e-commerce business and are struggling to effectively delegate your highly repetitive work to your team, Flowster's workflow management software and pre-made e-commerce playbooks make hiring, training, and delegating to your team an absolute breeze. Check it out today at flowster.app. On the show with me today is a very interesting woman by the name of Cody Sanchez. She is a reformed journalist turned institutional investor to now a managing director and partner at Entourage Effect Capital, a private equity firm focused specifically on investing in the legalized cannabis industry. Now, as if that doesn't keep Cody busy enough, she is also the founder of a very rapidly growing newsletter called Contrarian Thinking, which was started in January of 2020. It's actually how I discovered Cody, and she's already grown the newsletter to over 100,000 subscribers. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about in this episode, is the opportunity to either buy or build a newsletter, the pros, the cons, how you can monetize it, and all of the things that you might be curious about if this type of business is appealing to you. And let me just tell you that you can work from anywhere. The gross margins are very high, and it will create more opportunities than you can shake a stick at. So with that said, please join me in welcoming Cody to the show. Hey, Cody, welcome to the show. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So I discovered you because we're in the same trends group and you write a really cool newsletter, which I'm sure we'll talk about at length in this interview because that's what we're going to be talking about. But for the folks who don't know who you are and haven't heard of you yet, let's start there. Who the hell are you?
Sure. So I write a newsletter called Contrarian Thinking. So you guys can check that out. It's all about unconventional ways to cash flow and think critically. And that's at contrarianthinking.substack.com. And that's really just an iteration of the fact that I've been an alternatives and investment banking and private equity investor for quite a few years now. And I kind of, I got interested in how could we teach people things that I wish I would have learned while I was on Wall Street, or even better, while I, went to my MBA or went to undergrad. And I was a little annoyed about the fact that in finance, there's this term, which is get rich quietly. And I understand what people mean by it. It means don't have fancy cars, don't have the elaborate pin suits, all that jazz. But I also think it's hard to enrich others if you're just focusing on getting rich by yourself. And so that's why I started Contrarian Thinking, is I thought we should share these ideas across the board. And it's not a zero-sum game in making money and in creating mental frameworks to think a little bit more critically. And the world could probably use some contrarian ways to do both of those these days. So I went from being a conflict journalist forever and a day ago and across the US-Mexico border to working at Goldman, doing the whole, Wall Street asset management build out, to becoming a private equity partner at a cannabis firm, to building out a couple of my own businesses. And that got me to finally sharing some of those ideas and hanging out with my, couple 100,000 contrarian homies.
Absolutely, of which I am one. And folks, if you haven't checked out our newsletter yet, I highly recommend that you do. That's why I invited Cody to be on the show. It is a superb newsletter. It comes out weekly, I believe, right?
That's right.
Yeah, full of really cool ideas. Was it you that wrote about the bubble hotels, or was that Sam? I don't remember.
No, I didn't do bubble hotels. I did hipster campsites for profit.
Yep.
Yeah. And then and stuff about modular homes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those are pretty interesting. Yeah. This week's it's about inflation, which is a scarier topic, but an interesting one nonetheless.
Absolutely. All right. So we're going to talk about newsletters as a business because one, you've got a successful newsletter. Two, I've never done an interview about newsletters as a business. And three, I think there's an incredible opportunity for anyone who is interested in doing this to get into it. And of course, you're going to tell me all about that because you know far more about it than I do. So let's give the quick background on contrarian thinking. Like, when did you start it? Why did you start it? What was the problem you were trying to solve, and so forth?
Yeah, so I started Contrarian Thinking in January of 2020. And the problem that I was trying to solve was I think the most important thing in wealth creation and in, leading a successful life, I hate to say, is your ability to ask questions. And, I'm a former journalist, so that might lend itself to why I think that's so important. But the best investors ask the right questions, and the best CEOs ask the right questions and then find the answers to them. And what I've been seeing of late is that people aren't questioning things so much anymore, and that there's a little bit of a pushback to pushing back to the biggest narrative that's put out there, whether it's, the glaring one is politically, but even in regards to business or whatever the case may be. And so I started writing Contrarian Thinking because I want to push people to think. And I think we go to school for people to tell us what to think, not how to think. And so that's why I started Contrarian Thinking. And then I have an underlying belief that without financial freedom, there's really no freedom. And so if we compare our ability to think critically with our ability to earn unconventionally, we can be pretty powerful in building the world that we're all interested in building. And that was the impetus behind Contrarian Thinking.
Absolutely. And man, I agree with everything that you said there. There's so many opportunities these days that conventional thinking just doesn't expose you to. And the more you get into this world of online commerce, whatever you would like to call it, there's just so many neat ideas and cool people out there. And, you need to expose your brain to that kind of stuff. Okay. So newsletters as a business model, not something I ever thought of doing because I don't have your journalist background. I came into this and thought, well, I could probably talk on a microphone and ask some good questions. So 10 years later, I'm still doing that. But let's talk about the pros and the cons of the newsletter as a business model. Let's start with the pros. What is so compelling about this as a business model?
Well, I think it's really a resurgence, right? Everybody used to have email lists, right? They didn't call them newsletters, but they used to have email lists in which they sent you. That was pre-blog, that was pre-social media. And then it kind of went away with the advent of social media. Well, first the blogs and then social media. But what people forget is that email is the one platform that allows you to go direct to your recipient as opposed to being on somebody else's sort of ground, right? When you do social media, it's up to those social media sites how they change the algorithms, whether or not you're allowed to have access. I mean, I was thinking this last year before we've seen how quickly platforms can kick anybody off, right? But even before that, they just tweak an algorithm and they can turn your monetization off. From Amazon tweaking an algorithm, and then the next day your business is 50% less profitable or even 100% less profitable. And so the newsletter business to me is one of imperative. If you have any sort of business and you don't have an email list or a newsletter, I think that's probably a mistake, because one, you cannot get direct to your consumer, especially if you're in a world like today where most things are locked down. And so to me, it's really important that you can get in that email inbox and nobody else can control your ability to touch your end client. The interesting part about newsletters in particular, I think, is it meets at a crossroads. I mean, there's a piece on there that I wrote about sort of the declining journalism industry as we know it, which I don't think is a surprise for anyone. I saw it back in 2007 when I left journalism, because I saw the sort of polarization already happening then, and the focus on opinion news as opposed to factual news. And so it didn't sit well with me. So I left journalism and I went to numbers, which were much more quantifiable. And I think today what people are realizing is that the big news sources, first of all, they're all too focused on clickbait. They're all too focused on telling us the most aggressive version of whatever the narrative is in order to suck us in, and they go too wide. They've gotten so big that they can't niche down and add real value in the things that we care about. And so this micro industry is started, which is newsletters. And so I think Agora Financial has been one of the biggest acquirers and revenue generators from newsletters. They do about $1 billion a year in their bottom line on financial newsletters, and I think that'll be the future. There's going to be more paid, there's going to be more paywalls, there's going to be more micro, and there's going to be more local newsletters, and we will have to pay content creators for access.
So all of those are very compelling arguments. I would assume that the startup costs are relatively low, because really all you need to be able to do is have a computer and sit and write. Am I missing anything?
Nope, super cheap. I think newsletters have some of the best margins out there, 60 to 85% margins across the board, even with teams.
So let's talk about, actually, before we get into monetization, let's talk about some of the cons of newsletters. Are there any?
Yeah, I mean, of course, content is tough. I mean, this in the software business, you can create something once, iterate on it, and sell it continuously. When it comes to a newsletter, you have to continuously produce content. And so each week, I give a newsletter that's completely different from the one the previous week. And so that's infinitely less scalable than Google, which, has the ability as a software to just self-replicate and continue to be accessed with the same technology just iterated on. And so that's definitely a downside. And I think the other thing with newsletters is because they're so low of a barrier to entry, a lot of people play the game. And so you end up getting a graveyard of newsletters because everybody starts it since it's really easy to start, and then not very many people continue it over the long term. So I think those are the two hardest part. And maybe third, people don't realize how to monetize these things yet. Most newsletters are under monetized. And I think most newsletters aren't treated like a real business. It's like, ooh, my blog, my newsletter, as opposed to thinking about it as a business. And I've certainly been guilty of that as well.
So great segue to my next question on monetization. So let's talk about that. What are all the ways that you can monetize your newsletter, and talk specifically about what you've done, what you're doing, and what you're planning to do with your own, if you would.
Yeah, well, so I should pull it up here. So I have a whole blog post that basically walks you. So if you go to contrarianthinking.substack.com and you search, and you can search, wrote a book. If you search wrote a book in there, it'll take you to this newsletter segment, which basically talks about all the monetization channels I have on this newsletter. So I can just pull them up and show them to you. And I share with you the model of how exactly I built up the newsletter from a revenue perspective and the different revenue lines I have. There's 7 revenue lines that are on this newsletter right now. And how I layered them is totally up to you, but I started with info products. So I like these are just an info product would just be a guide you sell online, let's say, or something that you could have some sort of video content online. You create it once, you sell continuously. Not dissimilar to software. It just doesn't age well, right? Software you can keep iterating on. Info content, you have to actually go in and change the whole content in order to change it. So I started with info products, and I think that's a smart way to go. Then I went with a premium membership. And so that's, you pay to actually get some of the content. I actually did that first with another business we have called Unconventional Acquisitions. And so I created an info product for them, which is a course on how to buy and sell small businesses. Since I'm in PE, it's sort of my specialty. And then I did a mastermind, which would be a premium membership that allows for people to interact and engage on that at a very high price point, which allows us to do, $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month in sales. And then, a lot of people put on ad or sponsorship revenue. I have only used my own businesses and products to sponsor Contrarian Thinking, but plenty of people put out, ads and get sponsorships. I think for most people, it doesn't make sense because the newsletters are too small to actually get meaningful revenue, but you can. And then we have an affiliate business where if we like and use products, we include affiliate links. You can get revenue off that. We also have ancillary channels. So we get YouTube ad revenue off one of the other Unconventional Acquisitions businesses. And then what we usually do on top of that is create some sort of merch or, hard products that we can sell people once they start getting engaged. So for Contrarian Thinking, we have a journal now, and we have some stickers, and I'm working on some shirts and some swag. None of those are going to be huge income producing. It's more of a branding, and it's fun to do, and you can reward your subscribers for doing things for you with some cool branding swag. So those are the revenue lines we have on there now. We could go and create a lot more, but I think when you first start a newsletter, the smartest way to go, in my opinion, is keep your funnel free. So keep some free product open. Allow for people to buy something from you, some small dollar info product item if you can, then layer on those more expensive products, and then layer on the additional revenue streams. And with that, Substack has a great calculator that shows you how much you can make per premium subscriber. And then on my newsletter piece, you can actually see how much, if you have, I think I do an example of 20,000 and 10,000 subscribers, how much each revenue stream is going to give you and why. And I backdoor those numbers for you.
And you're now up to about 100,000 subscribers. Is that right?
That's right.
And you started in January of 2020, roughly 12 months ago. So that's pretty phenomenal growth. What has been the secret to having your subscriber base grow so quickly? And I don't imagine it's probably one thing. It's probably a number of things.
Yeah, that's always the devil's in the details, right? Well, there's another blog post on there actually that talks about my first 10,000 subscribers. And I think that one's good for people to read. So you just, go into Contrarian Thinking and search first 10,000 subscribers. But
we'll put links, folks. We'll put links in the show notes to all these things. So Cody, make sure you send me those links afterwards.
Perfect. We'll do. But the first thing that I did was very tactical. I would love to be one of those people that just builds something and immediately everybody comes running. Unfortunately, that's never been the case. I've had to drag them to start, and then the snowball starts rolling downhill. But when I first started, I sent an invite to maybe my 1,000 contacts that I had. I didn't auto-subscribe anybody, but I reached out to all of them individually and basically said, I'm starting this thing. Here's the why. Here's the what. Here's why I want you to be involved. And if you want to come along for the journey, great. And so the template that I used is actually in that post, but it was pretty sincere. It was like, I want to have a conversation with you all. I can't on a consistent basis. This is a way for us to do it and share ideas. And then as soon as I did that, I would layer on different strategies. Some of the easier ones are just social media outreach. So I use Buffer to schedule social media posts across all the varying platforms. I use Creator Studio for Facebook to schedule Instagram and Facebook posts. And all things would be a flywheel going back to the newsletter. I think the most successful thing to newsletter growth is after you've work hard yourself organically to get your first 2,000-3,000 subscribers. Once you get to your first 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers through just elbow grease, Then it's all about cross promotes and getting to other newsletters that are similarly sized and saying, hey, I like what you're doing. Do you like what I'm doing? How about we share what each other's doing to our audience and see if we can't grow together? And that has been really beneficial for me throughout. But there's no doubt about it. If you're not going to use ads for email growth, it is a grind and it takes a while. If you use ads, that's a whole different thing, but then you got to pay something like $1 to $3 per email subscriber. And that can be tough for people to do if they're just starting out.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to be profitable paying $3 an email subscriber now that you're a year into it at the size you're at?
I don't use ads, and I never have. So, yeah, we'd be profitable because our info products are high priced. And we sell, and with our big subscriber base, we sell a certain, enough of them. I think I looked down to our individual subscriber is about $3.14 is about the revenue they give us on an annual basis. I haven't actually figured out the LTV of them yet. We've only been doing this for 12 months. I don't really know how to forecast churn on these types of products. So we'll just have to see as we go. But my whole goal was try to grow something organically and try to grow something that can be profitable without having to juice it up through ad revenue. And it's really because that's not my strength. I don't know anything about using Facebook ads or Instagram ads or Google ads. Lots of people do. And I think eventually we'll add those on top of it. But while we were growing organically, it just didn't feel right or necessary.
Yeah. Join the club. I feel like I'm completely incompetent when it comes to ads. I've almost never used them, and I should, and it's been to my detriment. And every year I think I got to start doing it this year. And this year, I'm going to start doing it this year. All right. So would you say it was more difficult to go from 0 to 10,000 than it was to go from, say, 50,000 to 100,000?
They're both hard. I think the first 10,000 is actually the easiest because it's exciting. As they continue to grow, you're like, it's new and you keep going. And now, mind you, I run a private equity firm. I'm a partner at a PE firm. I don't do this full time. And so, as your business starts to, your newsletter, which now I think of as a business, starts to get 50 to 100,000, there's a lot more controls and work that you have to put into it, in my opinion. Yeah. And so it is faster to get to 50 to 100,000 than to get from 0 to 10,000. But it's equally a grind. And I think, if you want to hit those types of numbers, you've got to be consistent in content and working at it. And a lot of people, the average newsletter dies after 6 months. Most people don't post weekly, even for the first 90 days. I think it is making sure that you create that habit to do it, even when you don't want to do it, even when you think the post that week is terrible. And then you post something that's not that great, and then you lose some subscribers. And then that's, traumatizing. And so you're like, oh, I'm not even going to post anymore because I'm going to lose them. And you have to get out of those mindsets early on. And then, as you go along further, that shakes out a little bit more. But even now, I'll have some weeks where like, why are we only growing by 300 people or, whatever the case may be. And that just happens in a business.
So folks who listen to my show know that I'm a very big fan of systems and processes. And so we're talking a lot about content creation and the importance of content creation to basically how quickly your newsletter is going to grow, how quality it will be, how your churn, content's everything. So talk to me a little bit about how you go about the process of content creation week after week after week without burning yourself out and running out of the light bulbs that happen in the shower, because that only goes so far.
Yeah, well, you're right. First of all, I have something I call the 3 C's. So before you start a newsletter, in my opinion, you got to make sure, 1, it's a segment in which people will pay cash for something that you're writing about. So let me give an example. Say you're into knitting, and so you want to do a knitting newsletter. Well, I would go and make sure that people are spending money. What's the total addressable market? Just like a startup, quite honestly. What's the market for knitting? Are people into this? Is it a growing segment? Do people spend money? What does the average knitter spend on knitting things per year? So first you want to make sure that some cash people are willing to spend. Then you want to make sure there's a crowd of people willing to spend it. I like to do that by checking Facebook groups. So I'll go in and say like knitting Facebook groups. And in it, you'll find almost any subject. A lot of them will have 100,000 person groups where they talk all day about how to knit kittens or whatever the subject of the day is. Yeah. And so if you find those two things, then that usually means there's a market big enough for you to at least create your 1,000 true fans, which probably means you need to have a 10,000 person, maybe a 20,000 person email list in order to have your 1,000 true fans, which means you can make a living off of this type of thing. And the last thing, though, is the most important, which is curious. Is this something that you are naturally curious about, that if nobody pays you and if you weren't writing anything about, you would be interested and reading about it and engaged about it anyways? And if you don't have those three things, don't start the newsletter, in my opinion, because you'll burn out. And then the other thing that I think is important is to naturally keep chasing your curiosity. So, one of the ways that I do that is I'm always talking to individuals about what's working for them. And I'm an idea thief all the time. I'm like, oh, wait, how are you making money? Wait, what's happening there? Oh, wait, you had something like this happen to you? And I'm just taking notes and scribbling it down all the time as I'm listening to the world around me. And then I collate those. I keep them in an Evernote file. And every time I'm struggling for a subject, I just go back. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was an interesting conversation about a guy who had a request to buy out part of his business because it's, the competitor didn't want it in the space. That would be an interesting story, right? Yeah. And so anything like that, I'm going to take a little note and then I'm going to come back to it and think about how could this make people money? And is this a framework or a trend that we can play off of? And so I think that's the key. And then being stupid organized, which is a struggle for me. So I use Notion to plan out all of our content, to keep our mood boards in there, to share with the rest of the team. And that has helped us a lot.
So if someone is thinking, this is cool, I like the idea of a newsletter, I guess there's two questions that come to mind. One, have you found in your personal experience that having the newsletter has subsequently created additional opportunities for you, which weren't at all on your radar screen, for one of the question? Mm-hmm. And then the second part is, do they have to start one from scratch?
Oh, yeah. Great. I love these questions. So good. One is yes. I mean, let me tell you the pain points first before I just sound like Pollyanna telling everybody out there to go start a newsletter tomorrow, which is if you have, what's going to happen is once you have success in your newsletter, meaning followers, traction, lots of people engaging, you're going to get pushback. Anytime you have success, you'll get pushback from people that are not used to seeing you in that light. So, I am a partner in a PE firm, explaining to my other partners why this, newsletter that I have is now something that all of our investors read. That takes some getting used to, right? Mm-hmm. Explaining, to my, friends who want to then have phone calls with me about every idea that I have out in the newsletter because they think it's cool. And I have to say, no, I'm sorry. I do not have time to have a call with every single one of you. That part is a little bit painful. So just expect that if it succeeds, you will have some pain because people don't like change. And, people get nervous when you have success and it starts to blossom. They get nervous that you're not going to focus as much on the things that you were doing before. And they get nervous that you might, supersede or walk away from them. And this is the same thing with startup success too. Or side hustle success happens with everybody. So just expect that. But the part that I think is more interesting about it is, when you start a newsletter like this, you will not be able to guess the things that will happen to you if you are putting out authentic content that really is driven by your curiosity and you figure out your voice in it. And so I think those things are super important. The reason that people connect with contrarian thinking is like, I'm a little bit of a snarky asshole in it. You've listened to it. I'm like opinionated, I throw elbows, there's some entertainment to it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so people know if they're reading it, they're like, oh, that's a contrarian thinking post because that's Cody and she's being, whatever she's being. And then on top of that snarky entertainment, and maybe you get a chuckle or two, is like, oh, wow, this is like something that I can take today. And Cody takes something that might be kind of complex and makes it pretty simplistic, and then applies some new ideas or trends on top of it and tells me exactly how to execute on it. So they're like, well, that's cool, because it's not all theories. And for the most part, I act on the ideas myself and I build in public, which is really important. So if you do those particular things, I think a newsletter is great. And you're going to be really surprised. I've raised millions of dollars from this newsletter. I've had 85 people start a side hustle from it, 29 people start newsletters, 8 people bought businesses from it. And then I get to have conversations with people like you who give me ideas I never would have thought of. And that doesn't happen when you don't have an audience. Last spot on my little rant that I have going on here is, one of my last blog posts was talking about the 4 types of leverage, which, historically have been labor, employment, capital, money, code, like you, software, and now audience. And you didn't used to be able to really generate much from your audience, even if you were a celebrity. So few celebrities had brands, websites, social media, power. It didn't really exist. Back in the day, you still had to get chosen for movies, right? You still had to have a director select you. And now we have this audience as leverage. And if you have leverage, you will never starve. And so I think you can have any type of the 4 types of leverage, but that is really powerful. And so the last point to your question about, oh my gosh, now I forgot. What was your second question?
Do you have to build one from
Oh
scratch?
yeah,
I
build
probably
versus
shouldn't
buy.
have buried those 2 questions together because they're kind of unrelated. So let's just pretend it's a
Well,
new
and I
question.
just get so excited thinking about leverage, ranting. So do you have to build? So couple things. No, first of all, you don't. I'm a big proponent of doing the exact opposite of what I did, which is buying things. When it comes to investing or building businesses, I buy every time. I try to start nothing. And I think that's really beneficial if you're investing or building a business for cash flow or profit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us don't build or do a startup because we're like, this has to exist in the world. And, I'm starting my restaurant because there's no other restaurant in the world like it. Or I'm starting my accounting firm because it's the only accounting firm in the world. It's like, no, I don't want to work for the man anymore. I'd like to be my own owner. I think I got a little bit of a niche. And hey, I'd like to become a multimillionaire. And so if that's the case, why not instead just buy the business so that when you close the deal, you're profitable on day one, you walk away with cash. And I think it's the same for a newsletter. We've bought 2 newsletters thus far, and I'm going to keep acquiring them because it's so much easier to grow through M&A than organically. Organic growth, like we were talking about, is tough. You got to go out and beg and plead people for you to give them value. But M&A, you can do it in day one. And newsletters are a highly uncommoditized asset class, which people have not figured out how to buy yet.
And when you make one of these acquisitions, Cody, do you just fold? You're not continuing to write 3 different newsletters. You just fold them all into Contrarian Thinking. So basically you're buying subscribers, or is it different than that?
So there's some funky email rules that mean you can't really do that always. Now, nobody usually comes after anybody for that. But actually what I do just to stay compliant, because I have other businesses and liabilities that I want to be careful about, I run their newsletters for a period and give opt-in forms for them to transfer to my newsletter. Okay. So I don't auto-subscribe anybody to Contrarian Thinking. And I also just try to think about in business for the most part, what would I like people to do to me? I don't want to be bought and then all of a sudden subscribed to some other newsletter, even if it is highly valuable. So some people do it that way. It is actually legal if you buy it within a business framework and you disclose it in the right way, but I'm thoughtful on that.
So then if you're making these acquisitions, you've got now 3 times as much content to write. Is that correct? Or do you have writers that are writing the other ones and you're the key writer behind Contrarian Thinking?
Yeah, I have writers that write the other ones, and we only have let's call it a 90 or 100-day window, 120-day window in which they're writing the content, continuing to push the readers over to Contrarian Thinking, and then eventually exiting the business overall. A lot of times we resell the newsletters. And so, for that reason, I keep it kind of quiet, which ones we've bought or sold, because not everybody needs to know that, but that is the real play. It's just like a private equity play. You get into the business, you optimize it, grow the subscribers. Then I transition those subscribers over to contrarian thinking. Hopefully the newsletter is still growing at that time, turn around and sell it to somebody else. And they usually want to run the business as a newsletter themselves, and they want to keep running that newsletter. So I would actually have less value if all I did is take the subscribers and pull them into contrarian thinking. Instead, I act as though contrarian thinking is a sponsor or a guest blogger or a guest post.
Yeah, absolutely. Only you're not really guest posting. You're just owning both of them for a period of time until you've extracted all the value that you think you can extract. And then you take that asset and resell it to somebody else and recapture what you paid, or hopefully a little bit more than what you paid.
Even more. That's the beauty of M&A.
Have you ever gone and say, hey, I'm going to try and find a really popular large Facebook group that's poorly monetized, and then bought that group to become the foundation, your base of subscribers? So you could basically sponsor the Facebook group with your new newsletter to try and suck them off the Facebook platform into your email subscriber list.
So I've thought about it with Facebook and with Instagram accounts.
Yeah.
The reason we've never done it is because it's against their policies. You're not allowed to sell those accounts. And because it's against their policy, it's not illegal, but it's very easy for that account to steal the account back from you. And so even if you take the email address associated with that account, they can show their credit card statement. They can show the incorporation of it initially. They can show all these things where you could buy the asset and then get locked out of it. And that sort of freaks me out. So the only way I would do it is if I bought from a known entity and had some sort of remediation or an ability to de-risk that happening. But I do think it's a good idea. You just have to figure out how to do it correctly. And I definitely know a lot of people are doing it.
And so for then anyone in the audience that does want to shop for a newsletter that might be for sale, how does one get deal flow for that? Where are you going to find these things?
Yeah, I mean, a couple different things. So I've used Deuce a lot, Duuce.
Okay.
Deuce, yeah. It's a platform for selling and buying newsletters called Deuce. So that's an option. There's also newsletters located on BizBuySell. There's newsletters located on Empire Flippers. There's newsletters located on Flippa, Flippa. All of those are sites for acquiring businesses, whether online or brick and mortar. So we've looked at all of those, but it's a grind. You really have to dedicate some weekly time to acquiring them. And you have to expect, like somebody the other day, we reached out to a newsletter that had 18,000 subscribers. It had been defunct for 12 months, so it hadn't sent anything in 12 months. And it made $0 in profit. And the guy wanted $150,000 for the newsletter. And it's like, what? Like, in what world, man? And so you just kind of write back like, that's cute. No. But like a lot of people, because this isn't a known entity, they don't understand that newsletters are like any other business. We buy you at 2 to 3x your profits. And if you don't have profits, we could figure out some sort of deal, but it's definitely not going to be on a dollar by dollar basis for your subscribers. And that's not happening. And so you got to separate through a ton of these. And you have to, the other thing that's tough in that space is you've got to, there are some times where you just want to like knock heads, and you just have to realize that most people have never been approached to buy anything from them. And so they hear these like stories of, people buying businesses for millions of dollars. And so they have, lollipop dreams. And so you got to kind of be kind to them. And instead of hammering them about the ridiculous nature, instead sort of say, hey, this is how it's typically broken down. And actually, it's the opposite of what you're taught about negotiation. When you're going to buy newsletters, tell them first how you're going to value your newsletter and tell them at what basis, because they'll embarrass themselves if you don't tell them that, and then they'll disengage. And so, because they'll have built this idea that's up here and you won't be able to reach it. So start out by first saying, hey, I buy newsletters on 2 to 3x profit. If you don't have any profit in the business, we could figure out a per dollar cost for your subscribers, but it's going to be based on your open rate and conversion rate over to my newsletter. And so if that's of interest to you at those sort of metrics, let's have a conversation.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Last question. Why Substack versus a blog, for example, on WordPress, self-hosted, that you totally control the platform? Because earlier you talked about the risks of, being on Facebook or whatever. They can change things and then you're SOL. And here you are putting your content on an asset that you don't own.
Yeah. So we do not have the majority of the newsletter subscribers on Substack. So we're on 3 platforms. We're on MailChimp, we're on Substack, and we're on FUB. And the reason we're on those 3 platforms is exactly what you said. First, I wanted to test each one and see which one made the most sense. I have a legacy system that I had a newsletter and email subscribers on for some time at MailChimp. And I wanted to see what the subscription rate would be between them. Substack is the easiest to drive people through to, and without us having to build an interface. So a lot of, every subscriber that's on Substack is a new subscriber. But MailChimp has legacy emails on it, and FUB is where we go for most of our cross promotes go through FUB. And so now going forward, that's totally not sustainable. And I actually want to control the design of it. So Substack has a really poor, oh my gosh, what's the word? So when a person comes to a subscription rate, so basically our conversion rate on Substack is like 10%. It's really bad. And so we have people come to our site and only 10% of them sign up. Whereas when people go to the cross promotes we do, we have something like 50%. And so we're creating our own website for exactly that reason. We're going to test it out with, some percentage of the subscribers and then eventually migrate to that all entirely. I also thought Substack might help with driving traffic to the newsletter earlier, but it's not really a big driver in that way. So I don't think it's worth it. Plus, they take 10% of every dollar you earn on premium memberships, which is way too much.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, Jason Fried from Basecamp, I think he was on Substack and moved off Substack for much.
Yeah, I believe it. I think a lot of people do that.
FUB, is that fub.bk? What is that?
No, FUB is actually, it's called Follow Up Boss. It's actually a legacy CRM system.
Oh, okay.
And the reason that we use that one is that one of the newsletters that we acquired is in the real estate space.
Got it.
And so it came on this platform.
Okay. So thank you very much for making some time to come on the show and explain to myself and to my audience about the business opportunity behind newsletters. In the pre-interview, I asked you if you would come with some kind of special offer in case anybody wanted to get some more Cody goodness.
Thank gosh you remembered this, because I never do. So I think we have 2 special offers for you guys. So the first one, and I got to check the boss, which is my assistant who always decides what these are. Okay. So you have a discount code for unconventional acquisition. So if anybody wants to learn how to buy a small business or how to acquire a newsletter or how to acquire an online business, you go to howtobuyasmallbusiness.com and the code is Bright Ideas, and that's 25% off everything. And then Contrarian Cash Flow, which is our premium version of Contrarian Thinking, is coming out in February. And if they want to purchase that, then you'll get a 25% discount as well with the code Bright Ideas.
Okay. And that's contrariancashflow.com?
That is actually going to be at contrarianthink.com. I'll send you the links. So that's contrarianthink.com. And then how to buy a small business. Either one, use code Bright Ideas.
Okay. I know that you're pretty active on Twitter. In case folks might want to engage with you on the Twitter sphere, I believe you are at Cody with an IE at the end _Sanchez, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Somebody else took my actual name, which I'm not into, but I'm at Cody _Sanchez.
Damn them. That's a good thing about being a Trent Dyrsmid. You know how many Trent Dyrsmids are in the world?
Exactly. Not that many. I wouldn't think there's very many Cody Sanchez. Maybe they just front ran me on that trade, and I got to buy that username too.
Right. Yeah. We'd love to know what percentage of our audience knew what front ran you on the trade meet. I'll bet.
Oh yeah, probably.
What that is. I do.
Yes.
But anyway, it's not important. That's Trent just being an idiot. So thank you so much.
It's investing jargon.
Yeah, I spent my first career was in your space, so that's why I understand what that is.
Oh,
Anyway,
good. You got out.
I digress. My audience is going to think I'm an egotistical ass by now. So thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Right back at you. Thanks again for having me, Trent.
Thank you so much for listening. That concludes this episode of the show. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would take a moment and like, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast listening app. To get to the show notes for today's episode, go to brightideas.co/359. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much for listening to the Bright Ideas Podcast. Check us out on the web at brightideas.co.
All right, show's over. I'm tired.